Hey everyone, you're listening to the Active Turnkey Podcast, a podcast designed for hands-off, passive real estate rental investors. In the Active Turnkey Podcast, you'll hear Tom Olson and Jared Stoltmeister discuss all things turnkey rentals with other turnkey providers, service providers, and rental investors. Our goal is to help you reach your financial freedom and whatever comes after that. Let's go. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Active Turnkey Podcast. I'm your host, Jared Stoltmeister, and as usual, we have with us the Tom Olson.
That's me.
We're here and we are back, and we're trying to churn out podcasts for you guys. We've had some seasons where things were going on, and some of those were legitimate reasons, but we really do want to bring some
we
content
literally
to you
had
guys.
a fire in this building.
Yeah, and that was a good reason. We could not record in here for sure. But we're doing it now. And we're bringing the content, and so we want to bring a couple of them to you here, and we have a interesting topic today. But before we get to topics,
yes, we've got to start with some humor. It's
we're going
kind
to start
of our
with
thing
the
this year.
Important stuff first, right?
Yeah, you got it. You got it. So, Jared, you know the story about the chicken that crossed the road?
I've heard of that. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I couldn't follow it.
That's good.
I don't know. Okay. I almost got him there. Got him there on that one. That was a good one.
I have one. My mother asked me to hand out invitations for my brother's surprise birthday party.
Really?
That's when I realized he was the favorite twin.
I didn't know you had a twin brother, Jared.
Well, yeah.
You must have a favorite.
Talk about it.
Okay.
He's successful, smart.
All right.
handsome.
So, Jared, what do you get when you get? I'm sorry. What do you get from a pampered cow?
Pampered cow. Tell me.
Pampered cow. You know, like how you have kids, you get spoiled milk.
Ooh. Yeah. Yeah.
Get it?
Is.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
If I have to explain it
These
to you,
cows
then it's
these
not
days.
as good.
The cows these days.
All right. So that's going to be enough for me for jokes.
Yeah, I'm done.
All right, we're done. We're done with the jokes. So we're going to we have a topic today we're going to talk about. And, some of the topics we talk about are kind of big picture.
Yeah.
Some of the topics that we talked about are like really pinpointed. Mm-hmm. And this is going to be one of those topics. Yep. It's very specific. It's and because we want to always address like the needs, we always want to address like problems.
Yeah.
In this, a lot of podcasts about turnkey rentals, the only thing they want to talk about is cash flow and how you're going to retire and how this is the best way to retire and how so many millionaires are made by real estate. And those are all valid points, honestly. They really are. Like there's more millionaires created by real estate than any other industry in the world. Now, there's many ways to make money and there's many ways to become a millionaire and many ways to have financial freedom. But we are here building rental portfolios for investors. And we want to kind of always showcase the fact that, hey, there is kind of good and there is bad. And a lot of times when there's bad, there's something else that's good that kind of outweighs the bad. And you just kind of you really have to take the good with the bad, right?
Yeah.
So we try to get into the nitty gritty, and this is going to be one of those podcasts. It's probably not going to be super long because it's not like a great topic to talk about. Honestly, it's a topic we don't really like to talk about, but we feel like we should, right, Jared?
Yeah, and this is an update. This is an update, and so typically
for our market, our local market here in Gary, Indiana. If you guys have been following us for any period of time, you guys know that my goal is to flip the city of Gary, Indiana, and what that means to me is that Gary becomes a place where people move to instead of away from, and businesses come here and they thrive here, and it just really, the whole community kind of changes the face of what it's been for really probably the last 20, 30 years. The 1950s and behind, Gary was like a mecca. It was like one of the most important cities in not just like this region, but like really in the whole Midwest. Even the World's Fair was here, 100 years ago. This was just as important of a city as Chicago, say 100 years ago. So, Gary has been a very important city throughout the years. And today, it's really kind of gone down, and we are doing our best. We've planted our roots here. I live in Gary, Indiana. Our office is in Gary, Indiana, and I would say a good majority, probably 60 to 70% of our turnkeys that we work with our investors are in Gary, Indiana. So this is going to be specifically about the taxes.
That's correct.
Right? A tax update.
If we're going to be specific, the title for the podcast is Real Estate Spring Tax Update.
Yeah.
Okay. And It's legit. And Tom mentioned it. He lives in Gary, so this is affecting you. We
Absolutely,
just talked about before the podcast.
I just got my tax bill like
just
2 days ago.
Yep. And he's paying taxes.
They went up.
He's paying taxes. And so we're going to give you really two main takeaways today. But we're going to kind of lay the groundwork a little bit. So first of all, Tom, would you mind disclosing to everybody how and as a reminder, some of you have been on the podcast and you know how Indiana taxes work. Would you mind describing just in general how the taxes work for the investor?
Sure. So in the 2000s, taxes were kind of all messed up. They were really, and honestly, I'm not even say they were all messed up. There was a number of people who thought that the taxes were unfair. Let's
allegedly
just preface it with that, because honestly, in Gary at that time, taxes were like $600, $800 a month for most houses. I think most people in Gary would have rather this tax
a
year. I'm sorry,
okay.
A year. I think most people that were investors in Gary wish that decade never happened. Sure. Because actually, maybe it was the 90s. I'm sorry. I think it was actually in the 90s when this happened. But so there was some guy from St. John, Indiana, which is in Lake County, Indiana, right here. And he literally walked all the way down to Indianapolis, and he was on the media, on the news, and he walked with this sign saying how taxes were unfair in Lake County and how he wanted to change the taxes in Indiana. So this was this big media story and how things were so unfair because we in Indiana were doing taxes pretty similar to the way the rest of the country was doing taxes. So what basically came up, and it was so funny because at the time this guy had a house in St. John, and it was about a $350,000 house, and he was paying about $4,200 a year in taxes. And if you look at that today in today's world, and you thought, okay, I've got a $375,000 house, and I'm paying $4,200 a year in taxes, like most places around the country would think that's a pretty fair tax, But he didn't think it was fair. Because he felt like all the people in North County and the cities like East Chicago and Hammond and Gary weren't paying their fair share. And he felt like he was having to pay the tax for all these other people. So with that became a big lawsuit. And just like we've kind of recently talked about the big lawsuit of NAR, right? Whenever these things end up getting settled, they never really end up turning out the way that you hope that they would, you know? Now, I will mention, just like I mentioned back then, normally it's never as bad as you think, but normally it's also not as good as you hope for. So it's always somewhere in the middle. But in this case, for people in the North counties, when the whole thing came out and the whole Indiana Supreme Court decided to decide on the case, and then the lawmakers had to get involved and actually create new laws about the whole thing. Initially, the people in North counties were then getting really badly screwed over, to be honest with you. I know I saw tax bills myself on properties of friends of mine during that time period where they went from literally paying $800 a year to $10,000 a year on properties in Gary during that same period of time. And what was so bad is at the time they retroactive the tax back. So they went back like a year and a half or 2 years. So if you could imagine somebody that was used to paying $800 a year in tax now being charged $10,000 a year and then being retroactive back, they had a big, huge tax bill. Most people that had a mortgage company were getting bills of like $10,000, $15,000. And a lot of these investors were like, what are we going to do? Yeah. Honestly, this was probably the biggest gut punch to the city of Gary was the fact that the taxes got completely messed up, and it didn't honestly hit the homeowners as much as the investors. The investors really got honestly, screwed over in a major way. And a lot of investors at that period of time, and this was in the 90s, said, hey, I'm done. I'm out of here. Yep. I'm out of this game. I'm not going to pay $10,000 a year in tax.
Some of them couldn't.
They were really making $150, $200 a month on the property when the taxes were $800. How in the world were they going to be able to cash flow? So that's one thing I think that we do need to bring to the forefront whenever the government gets involved, whenever legislation gets involved. Normally there's these unintended consequences that they may or may not know, but I think it's so important to kind of bring that out and tell people, hey, don't be all for something until you really know what the outcome of that's going to be. It's normally better to leave things alone than it is to make some big change. So that happened and created a massive ruckus, and it took about 2.5, 3 years for
long time.
A lot of people in this county, especially North County, to go down to state and be like, hey, now you've flipped this table upside down and now it's completely messed up.
Sure.
So Indiana lawmakers came up with a system that said, okay, we are going to cap your taxes at 1% if you live in the property, 2% if it's like a single family type of, or it's a rental, or 3% if it's a commercial dwelling. So what that did, honestly, is, in my opinion, it actually put an unfair burden on different people now. Now, like the company, it almost like made it anti-business to a certain degree. And so that is honestly one of the reasons why it's still hard to get businesses to come to even Gary, Indiana. And I think this is partly the reason why Amazon just put their headquarters just on the other side of the border in Illinois, even though Illinois is generally a higher property tax state and generally harder to work with. In my opinion, if they were to build a big complex here, and so the steel mills do have some kind of a special deal, and honestly, there's a lot of argument happening still about the steel mills. I still think the steel mills are paying a lot of money in tax, and I think it'd be really hard to replace the amount of tax that they're paying on their properties. For other properties up in Miller and up by the actual lake, but like it has created kind of a mess. But at least we know that now there's a cap, and that cap is supposed to be based on real market value, not just like what most assessors would go out. So whatever the assessor believes that the real market value would be of that house, that is what it's supposed to be assessed at now. They got rid of a lot of the big deductions that you used to have. There's still some small deductions. There's still a homestead exemption. There's still those types, and they're small. They're not as large as it used to be. A lot bigger deal if for a homestead exemption. It used to cut your taxes like way more than it does today. It used to actually cut your tax. Now it just cuts like how much the assessed value is and how much it's going to be taxed based on that. But honestly, for the most part, most of our taxes are higher than what the maximum is, because of our rating and how much we're supposed to pay, especially in Gary. So most of the time they're having to discount the tax in order to get you to that 1%. So with all that being said, in the city of Gary, Indiana, 5-6 years ago, the average value on the houses was $45,000 to $60,000. This is partly why we have been telling people, hey, buy in Gary. I was telling people back in 2017 and 2018, hey, all the houses that you bought in Maryville and in Highland and in Hobart and Crown Point and St. John and those areas, it might be time to take some money off the table and put it over here in Gary. The problem is most people were afraid. Right. Most people that went down that trail with us, we made them a ton of money.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of them did sell their properties when we told them to sell, but a lot of them didn't. But the people that did sell, like they maybe moved their money into doing lending, or maybe they moved their money into our fund or some other investments that they found. Some panned out good, some probably didn't pan out well. But the people that did move in to Gary back then are honestly sitting very pretty now, especially if the people that have listened to what we told them to do. But all that being said, every single year there's going to be a new assessment, and with the property values rising now, I don't think we can sit back and think, okay, our properties are just going to sit at this tax rate. They're going to go up over time. There is going to be an increase in values, and with the increase in values now is going to come an increase in tax. So just know, if you're having an increase in tax, and Jared might go into a little bit more than nitty gritty. There are two parts of the tax too. One thing is that Gary historically has not had a lot of voter approved stuff. So the only thing that can go above that 1% is if the voters actually approve to add things, or they're going to do a big project, or they're going to do this or do that. And so this I know in my own personal house, there's $670 on my own personal tax bill that I just saw that was voter approved stuff. Now, I don't think it's going to be that amount for every house.
Right.
I think most houses, that are rentals are probably gonna be like in the $300 range. But we are going to see that. So if your taxes let's just say your taxes are $1,600 and you're used to that tax being, $1,200 or $1,300. Well, what that means is that property now is probably worth 130, 140, 150, and there's a couple $100 in voter approved stuff. So you've got to take. We have to be willing to kind of take our hits when they come. On the flip side, that's kind of what's happening right now, and we do need to know that, and we need to be like, okay, our taxes are going to go up. Also, insurance kind of has gone up a little bit, and it's not been bad. We've got properties in Florida, and I'm telling you, we are fighting like tooth and nail. Our insurance in Florida, I mean, everything at least doubled in Florida, but we're seeing properties insurance go up, 20%, and in some of our Northwest Indiana areas on the insurance side of things. But taxes we're seeing go up also 20-30%. But in that same 2-3 years, we've also seen our rents go up 30% as well. Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, that's all important. And again, when we're talking about appreciation, Tom already mentioned it, but when you see the assessments go up, that's by the design of what we're doing. We expected there to be appreciation, so that is good. And so no one likes per se their taxes going up, but that means that your property is gaining value, which is fantastic. Especially as an investor, that's one of the wealth drivers in when you buy a rental property is the appreciation piece. And so I think sometimes we love the positive but don't like the negative attached to it. But I think we'll be okay with it down the road once we sell and we see we have a ton of money that's in there that's from the appreciation. And so that's definitely it. Now, getting into the update portion and how that affects the buyer today, outside of Gary. Typically, and this has been really since we started, you could say that outside of Gary, in fact, I bought a turnkey property from the company about 7 years ago in Hammond. I bought it for $110,000. Okay, when the assessment came out the next year, the assessment came out at $109,900, $109,900, right there, and they gave me a little break, about $100. Okay, and that I would say that's predominantly the numbers you would see outside of Gary is a really on par number with what's happening in the market. Now, what we could tell you is the data would say in Gary, that was not the case. No, it was not assessing at dollar per dollar with what's happening in the market. And up to last year, that's 100% true. And in fact, there are many different analyzers or what have you that maybe Bigger Pockets, I think, has some sort of analyzer or like a calculator that you could use that will generate numbers. And really to date, I've had to tell people, hey, I know outside of Gary it's the case, but in Gary, just look at the numbers. It's not the case. It doesn't do it dollar for dollar. However, this last year in spring, in doing a very light, I wouldn't say a deep dive, we would say a semi deep dive. Okay, not even deep. Okay, but what I have seen is Gary. If you own a property in Gary, there has been a jump in the assessed values. Now, some of you have owned in Gary, you've seen appreciation. You have not seen significant increases in taxes. Good for you. Good for you. That means you've probably made more with your increased rents and your lower taxes. You probably made more than maybe you should have. But today we are seeing a higher number. Now, it seems also like
a lot of times this is happening at time of sale. Right. It normally when they reassess, it happens at time of sale, Correct. Even normally in the year of sale. Sometimes, though, it seems like they've missed it. Correct. And it does seem like Jared's saying, I think what you're trying to say is that like this year, they're kind of going back and checking. Oh, is this house sold in the last 2 or 3 years?
More significantly than
and they're actually
past,
going at that sale price. So, but what does that do? To me, that actually also brings another new opportunity that you might want to consider at this point in time, because buying turnkey, now you're buying closer to retail prices. Correct. I mean, sometimes we give equity when we sell turnkey, but for the most part, you're buying close to retail. But to me, this opens up a whole nother reason to possibly buy active turnkey. So if you buy a house for, say, $60 that needs $50,000 in repairs, you can determine, like, if you want to buy that house for $110 on paper, that's going to be worth $130 or $60 on paper. Now, if you buy it for $60 on paper, I will tell you, you might have a harder time with the house appraising at the higher end. But if you buy it for $110, maybe now you'll get hit with that $110 number at sale for new assessed value. Again, I'm just trying to give some kind of a possible way to kind of think about this as you kind of make decisions. If you're going to buy active turnkey and maybe you're going to put $100,000 into a $130,000 property, well, you probably won't get reassessed at $130,000. You'll probably get reassessed at that $100,000 mark, where if you bought the same property turnkey for $130,000, you probably will get the full assess at $130,000. But if you want to back it up and be like, oh, maybe I should really have the purchase price be what the purchase is, not including the repairs.
Correct.
Might also want to think about having that lower price on the actual, property, in order to be able to save you some money on taxes. I do think in the long run, it will catch up to you. I think in the long run, they'll move those prices up. I don't think it's going to be, it's probably not going to say, okay, this is going to save me money for 10 years. I probably wouldn't put that into your projections personally. Sure. I think that they are going to try to do a better job and part of this is I know that nobody likes to pay taxes. Mm-hmm. I don't like to pay taxes. I was even telling Jared, this even happened to me. So my house, I bought it from the company. The company bought did the whole rehab. I bought it from the company, the first year they didn't catch it. Mm-hmm. They did not catch it the first year around. And now this last year, I'm like, okay, now my taxes are going up to what I really expected them to go up, the previous year. So it's just something to think about, something that you might want to, kind of stick in the back of your head as you're looking at performers, as you're trying to see, what properties are going to make. Just kind of know that this is out there, and they are kind of looking at this. And, honestly, a lot of times on our performers, we've tried to put that 2% on our performers, and then the first year comes out and they don't catch it. Sure. So then, and a lot of our investors have been able to take advantage of that. Sure. But don't expect that to be the case forever.
Yeah. And just to double down on what he said, when I did the semi deep dive, the turnkeys were almost on par. All of them increased near or at a higher rate than previous year properties. And so it seems like Gary is being more active. However, on deals where I knew that there was a BRRRR deal for that particular house, they were not raised. Even
so, the active turnkey is
the active turnkey deal, the BRRRR deal. That's not that they are not being raised because again, and it's all data points. So and I I have permits being pulled. We have permits being pulled for these properties that I was checking. So it's not a matter of information that the county may have. It is literally using the data points that the market is giving them. So sold properties, and so when it comes to BRRRR deals, the increase was marginal. I'm saying marginal. I mean by a couple $100, not like so an assessment range of I had a personal property. The assessment was raised by like $1,500, whereas like a turnkey deal, the assessment raise is closer to retail. And so that is that again, I think Tom's 100% right. That is today's information. Next year, it could be completely different. But if you're looking to do BRRRR and you have access to it, that can be a strategy where you can say, hey, maybe you want to call it a loophole. I'm not sure if we want to call it that, but it's an opportunity for you to capitalize on that. And just from a religious perspective, Jesus would talked about the idea of people paying taxes, and people brought to Jesus the idea of hey, this person. He was accused of falsely accused of saying that we shouldn't pay taxes to Caesar. And one of the lessons he taught was the idea that, well, hey, show me that coin. Show me that coin, and it has the image of the Caesar on there. And the point he was making is we love to enjoy some of the freedoms that Americans have. And but part of paying taxes is part of that. The freedoms that pays for government and pays for our police and all those things. So part of the benefits to paying taxes is, and we full well take advantage. We use currency that is not our own. It's the government's, and we use it openly. So anyway,
and honestly, and that actually goes into building the city of Gary, Indiana.
There you go.
Honestly and personally, like I had a conversation with the previous administration here in Gary, Indiana. I sat in the office and I told the mayor, I said, hey, like, show me your shortfall. And we sat down, they showed me the shortfall. And at the time, this was many years ago, at the time they said there was an $8 million a year shortfall. And I literally just did the math super quickly. And I said, okay, how many residents do you have? And I wasn't talking about businesses. I wasn't talking about steel mills. I wasn't talking about anything else. How many houses do you have? So how many houses? What's the house stock look like in Gary, Indiana? And then so she told me that the number. And again, I didn't even know any of this information going into this meeting. And I sat down there and I said, okay, what's the average house assessed for? And she told me $48,000. So $48,000 was the average house assessed at that time. And I told her, I said, okay, so if the average house is assessed for $48,000, what would this look like? Like, how much money do you bring in from houses, from tax revenue? How much does the city actually get from tax revenue from houses? And it was about $8 million is how much they got. I'm like, okay, so what you're telling me is if we were to double this, if every house in the city of Gary was worth $100,000 a year, I mean, not $100,000 value, and honestly, $100,000, that is not a stretch. Like, you couldn't build any of these houses for $100,000. Today, you probably couldn't build most of them for less than $200,000. So if every house was were to double in value, what would that do? And it didn't. Honestly, you would have thought at that point that the conversation would have went well. After that, it didn't go well, unfortunately. And unfortunately, there was all this talk about, the flippers are going to hurt the economy, and how are you going to hire? Are you going to only hire people from Gary? I'm like, I would love to hire people from Gary. Show me the people that can actually do the work. And today it's changed. It's changing, but it's not changing. It hasn't changed, in my opinion, from the leadership. But in my opinion, it's changed from people like us. And again, it's not me 100%. I don't even want to take 1% of the credit. I just know I've had part of I've been part of the solution to help flip the city of Gary, Indiana, and help it make it become a place that people move to instead of away from. And I believe that our people here that work for us and our investors, I'm very proud of the work that we've done. I still think we have a long ways to go.
A lot more.
And I don't want to let up. I don't want to let up on the gas. I want to continue to keep making this happen. We also have plans in the future to start building new construction in Gary, Indiana. But I believe that all of this, honestly, getting the tax revenue and getting the city of Gary to be able to make enough money to be able to pay its own bills, and it is, I think, is honestly positive progress.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you said it, Tom. If you have voter approved, it kind of stinks.
Yeah.
But like the point was, like, Gary didn't have voter approved charges for so long. But what does that mean? It means they're making improvements in the community. Gary needs that.
Yeah.
They really do need that. So even though it's a pain.
And don't even get me wrong. I know that the government can never spend their money as good as I can. And I don't think that they ever will. So that's not an argument I'm ever going to try to make. And yeah, there's lots of people that think taxes are 100% illegal and you never own your house. And that's fine. That's fine and dandy.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, I think the city of Gary, and I know this isn't about the city of Gary, this is really about the taxes we're trying to talk to you about, but I believe it takes a 3-prong approach. It takes the people of Gary, like wanting something better. It does take the government's part of the equation, and it also takes investment. It takes business. It takes people that are willing to put some money into something to make it better. And without all three of those people working together, I don't think it will work. But I do believe that investment left a lot because of the property tax fiasco that happened in the 90s.
Makes sense.
And then if that wasn't bad enough, 2008 kind of like made everything, go bad too. So it was like the people that didn't leave in the 1990s left. I think it was actually 2003 and 2008. So it was actually two things that happened in that one decade.
Pretty rough.
And you don't normally see that. You don't normally see a certain sector of the market get hit twice. Normally, even within 20 years. Normally, it takes like a big long cycle in order for things to kind of do that. But anyways, that's what's happening in Gary, Indiana. That's a tax update.
That's
here
your update, guys.
For Gary specifically. I think it's really all of Lake County. And all of really Indiana this is how taxes are supposed to be done. In the long run, I do think that the increase in rents will cover this. I do think the increase in rents will also cover maintenance costs over a long period of time. And we're going to talk about two topics coming in some future podcasts. One's going to be about that as well, about maybe turnover costs and how your increase in rents will help you there. But also, we're going to talk about in the next podcast Just a little teaser for everybody. In the next podcast, we're going to be talking about how to let other people make you rich. So there's just a little teaser there. So if this podcast has brought you value, give us a 5-star review. Tell your friends about us. Share this on Facebook. Like it. Subscribe. Hit all those buttons for us. We really appreciate you. Thank you for every one of our listeners. We get text messages and emails almost every single week about somebody that's enjoyed something on our podcast. Thank you so much for the comments and the feedback. We definitely welcome those. Thank you guys to our investors. We appreciate you as well. So just don't forget to like and subscribe and give us some reviews, especially on Apple Podcasts. We need a couple of those, guys. Appreciate you guys in advance for that.
And don't forget, we also build rental portfolios for investors. And so you can find us at onegroupnetwork.com. You can visit our website. You can join our list. You can set an appointment with me. We can have a conversation and we can talk more about that. But we can talk about more stuff we got coming up. We got some podcasts coming up. But thank you for joining us today. Active Turnkey.
The best way to buy rentals. God bless.
One Group Network makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast should not be considered professional advice. Unless specifically stated otherwise, One Group Network does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement. Any third-party materials or content of any third-party site referenced in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the opinions, standards, or policy of One Group Network. One Group Network assumes no responsibility or liability for the accuracy or completeness of the content contained in the third-party materials or on third-party sites referenced in this podcast, or the compliance with applicable laws of such materials and or links referenced herein.